Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mythopoetic Lecture on Juno and Hera, the Queen of the Gods, for the Fire Embodiment Sagittarius Season Workshop as part of the Elemental Goddess series. We're going to be exploring the mythology and significance in the birth chart of Juno, also known as Hera, the divine consort. We begin with an Orphic hymn to Hera. This was created by Sarah Mastros from her Orphic Hymns Grimoire, which I highly recommend. A modern take on the Orphic hymns. Lapis blue robes enfolding the sky, Hera the All-Queen, Zeus's true ally. Every moment you fill us with sustaining breath, giving life to all mortals from birth until death. Mother of the clouds, wet nurse of the gale, you blow up the storms and give life to the sail. You alone bring life to the creatures of earth. You nurture the egg and you bring it to birth. You are queen over everything under the sky, and so with a whooshing, wind-whipping cry, you roil the waters and rattle the leaves. Many-named goddess, we beg you now, hear our pleas. All queen most blessed, to our prayers be inclined, be beneficent, joyful, gracious, and kind. And you can see here the peacock's complaint. The peacock considered it wrong that he had not the nightingale songs. So to Juno he went. She replied, be content, why thy having, and hold thy fool's tongue. Do not quarrel with nature. So we're going to be exploring the mythology of Juno and her significance in her role as the Queen of Heaven. So Juno occupies the place in the asteroid goddess mandala at the descendant, and she represents, she's located within the 7th house of marriage and long-term committed partnership. And this mandala, which was conceptualized by Demetra George in her book Asteroid Goddesses, we see the sun as the boundary and encompassing, and then the moon reflecting the sun's light, Venus within that. The moon is the undifferentiated feminine principle, and Venus as manifestations of the divine feminine in her many forms, reproduction and love and attraction and reception, and then all of the asteroid goddesses emerging out from as manifestations of Venus. Ceres, the Great Mother, Pallas Athena, creative progeny, Vesta, self, and Juno, partnership. So we're going to be exploring partnership, union, marriage, and Juno today. Juno is known as the Queen of the Heavens, the goddess of marriage, patroness of childbirth, and an emanation of the triple moon goddess. Her symbols are the royal scepter, the diadem, the veil, the peacock and the cuckoo, the pomegranate, the cow, the holy heifer, and the rainbow for the winds and atmosphere. Known as Hera to the Greeks and Juno to the Romans, she was the queen of the gods and the divine consort of her brother, Zeus, Jupiter. From the root Hera, meaning the earth, and the feminine form of hero, her animal is the peacock, and she was ornamented with a crown, diadem, and attended by a rainbow. She held a pomegranate in her left hand and a scepter and cuckoo in her right. I should say right. She was the goddess of marriage and patroness of brides. Revered for her fidelity and loyalty, she presided over rites and arrangements of marriage. The 6th month of the year was sacred to her, and today people are married in June to receive her blessing. So June is actually named for Juno, and in modern times, although people are not aware of this, that is why many people, the custom and tradition of marrying in the month of June is to receive the blessing of Juno over your partnership. to make it long-lasting and faithful. As patroness of childbearing, she symbolized the reproductive cycle. This is part of her ancient moon goddess emanation. And as goddess of the calendar, she used the menstrual cycle to mark the orderly passage of time, 20.5 days. She was the feminine principle of celestial light who bestowed the life-granting power of conception. And as birth goddess, she leads children into the light. In Greek mythology, there was a prophecy that Kronos, also known as Saturn, would overthrow his children, where his children would overthrow him, so he swallowed them. Hera was released from her father's stomach by her brother Zeus, and later Zeus saw her walking by a mountain, disguised himself as a cuckoo bird, which is a symbol of fertility. Hera embraced the bird because she loves birds, and Zeus turned back into himself and attacked and raped his sister. Due to social constraints, she married him out of shame, guilt, and obligation. So many of these myths have very violent origins, and Hera's story includes this kind of violence, and so there's going to be prompts at the end around writing, and if this brings up any feelings, I just encourage you to kind of take time and take space and do writing and share with people who can be supportive, and feel free to reach out around that. So the Queen of Heaven is a much older emanation of the triple moon goddess who reigned alone and had no consort. So originally, Hera did not have a partner. She was raised by the seasons, and her temple at Olympia is much older than Zeus's. The frustration from her marriage came from a confinement from the more empowered role she originally inhabited pre-patriarchal times. So the wedding of Hera and Zeus was a symbolic merging of ancient goddess worship with patriarchal culture. So in another version of the story, Hera consents to the marriage and they marry in secret, and their wedding lasts for 300 years, which is their like secret marriage is 300 years long, which or the process of getting married, which was the same amount of time it took for the conquering, invading patriarchal warriors to subdue the goddess worshiping communities where she was originally the queen of the heavens. So we see this myth as part of the telling of how female deities who were once prominent fell into inferior positions and lost their status. And so eventually Zeus brings Hera to Mount Olympus, and they have a wedding ceremony. It's celebrated by all the gods. Everybody brings gifts. Gaia gives a tree of golden apples. And so this is seen as the merging of the cultures and the patriarchal culture absorbing the goddess worshiping practices. But now, instead of Hera as the queen of heaven, ruling alone and reigning sovereign, she is in relationship to Zeus, who then becomes the father of the sky and has the power of the lightning bolt and all that. And Zeus, Jupiter, is the ruler of Sagittarius season, and we're in Sagittarius season. And so Jupiter is really known for his power and his appetite and always chasing after people that he found sexually desirable, men and women, and always kind of doing whatever he wanted, tricking people, like morphing into animals, attacking people, forcing himself on people, you know, using all manners to gratify his own sexual appetites and desires. And so when we're looking at Sagittarius season, Hera does not actually have a correspondence to Sagittarius season, but Jupiter, her husband, does. And so we're looking at her experience of him as a way to think about how we can come into balance with the principle of fire, because many, many people in our society today have really complicated relationships to their own desire and to passion, and do a lot of sublimating because we don't have a lot of healthy models of how to be empowered around one's sexuality and how to engage in healthy relationships. So through looking at the model presented by Hera and Zeus, or Juno and Jupiter, we're able to kind of tease apart and explore and get our awareness into our own experience of these archetypes. So Hera would not have chosen to marry Zeus, but she did, and at first they're happy in their union, and they have a passionate sexual connection, but then he begins to cheat on her and she becomes very jealous and embittered, and the result is that they come to live in a perpetual state of tension and battle. And so what we see here is that fundamentally, when there is an unequal distribution of power in relationships, there's a lack of harmony. So when we're thinking about Hera, we're always thinking about how can there be balance, how can there be equality, and how can that create greater harmony and union in the partnership. So Zeus would hurl thunderbolts at her. She worked to undermine and humiliate him. And he sought her advice, but he didn't fully trust her, and she did not trust him. So their arguments turned cruel and violent. To punish him for his arrogance and infidelity, she bound him to his bed with leather straps and invited other gods to mock and insult him. He got revenge by hanging her off a cliff. So their relationship devolves into a lot of violence. And we know that patriarchal culture really breeds violence because of the privileging of masculinity above femininity, and whoever it is in the relationship that is being faithful and kind of sticking to the marriage vows, that person often becomes very unhappy, even though they are the one who's doing what they believe is right. And so Hera honored her vow of monogamy, but Zeus didn't. And, you know, we see here this kind of classic, the woman being denied full sexual agency because, you know, she was obligated to marry him because he raped her, and then she was obligated to maintain faithful, although he was not. And so this is a core wound in our psyche that Hera can help us to heal through exploring her archetype and where she exists in the birth chart, and whether or not these are things you've experienced personally yourself. And again, if you have, I really hope you take time with the writing and exploration to kind of work through these things and then share them with a therapist or friend. This archetype lives as a wound in our collective unconscious. And so she is in need of healing. We are in need of healing around this dynamic. So this double standard that men or masculine people can be free agents and do what they please sexually, and women or feminine people cannot. And these dynamics really cut across gender. They don't just apply to heterosexual relationships. You can see them in all kinds of queer partnerships too. This is a general dynamic pattern that relationships break down around. So due to the diminished status of the divine feminine and women, Hera is forced into obedience and submission in her marriage, and her rage came out sideways. She began to punish Zeus's lovers and their children with curses and death, and she herself rejected anyone who tried to seduce her. And for that, she was revered for her loyalty and fidelity, and she was worshipped as the ideal bride and wife who sought fulfillment through the institution of marriage rather than through her partner who couldn't and wouldn't give her what she wanted and needed. So she hides within this socially respectable status of being married rather than, you know, breaking with the tradition and the institution and going off on her own. She stayed and remained unhappy. So she is a wife, but in some ways she is single as that, in that status of being a wife, and she seeks fulfillment from a single husband rather than from different lovers or polyamorous situations, which was much more common before patriarchal rule. And although their partnership wasn't fruitful, she birthed several parthenogenic children. So in the birth chart, Juno can also indicate the places in which we retreat from partnership and give birth to our own creation independent of partners and mates. So one act of resistance was that she didn't bear Zeus a legitimate heir, and that in that way refused to validate his throne. So when we look at Hera, we're seeing, okay, how did women respond to being put into these categories, how did women both respond and react to being within a patriarchal culture and relationship, and also how did they resist? So one method of punishing Zeus and resisting was for her to isolate herself and retreat to places where he couldn't access her. So leaving and returning is a big theme in their relationship. It's a huge dynamic, and you can see this this dynamic and this behavior acted out in a lot of famous relationships, and it's very common in relationships still. She would wrap herself in sadness. She would be humiliated by his behavior and ashamed for her own. So one of the things we look for with Hera is the way in which when we stay in relationships that don't make us happy, we become embittered. We start to act out in ways that make us feel badly about ourselves, and it runs down our self-esteem. And so then we stay in the situation that's making us unhappy because we come to believe that we don't deserve anything better because we don't like ourselves as much due to the way that we're behaving in that relationship, which is what's making us unhappy in the first place. So Hera would wrap herself in sadness and walk alone and feel very sorry and bad, but always return to Zeus. And whenever she stayed away too long, he devised tricks of engaging her jealousy to lure her back. So, you know, there's this falling into self-pity that happens due to mistreatment. And then instead of kind of using that time and space to work on herself and these issues of jealousy and codependency, she's kind of she's doing it out of spite, and then she's drawn back into the dynamic. So the mythology emphasizes, though, the need for retreat into solitude and renewal through water rituals and being surrounded by a community of just women. So there is an important emphasis on, if you are in a situation that is difficult, that and I think that this is also part of any kind of healthy relationship, is that retreat and taking time and space for oneself and being surrounded by one's community and doing things that are healing and nurturing and supportive for the body. But Zeus and Hera's marriage symbolized the model offered to women by patriarchal society. She embodied the suffering that comes from a lack of fulfillment in partnership and strategies employed to cope with abuse. So in astrology, when we look at Juno and Hera, although the mythology is really complicated, and it's not what I would consider to be resoundingly empowering for the Queen of the Gods, what we're looking at here is really the true status of what is difficult about navigating power in society for women. And in astrology, Juno symbolizes the principle of relatedness. Through the vehicle of committed partnership, she strives to realize perfected and balanced union with another. And she embodies the polarity of intimacy and manipulation, and is associated with the signs of Libra for marriage and Scorpio with sexual consummation. So Juno represents our yearning for full mystical union that satisfies emotionally, sexually, and psychologically. So when you look at her in your chart, you can kind of think about the way in which the sign and the house placement are indicating what you yearn for in partnership. And she indicates the emotional and psychological needs that motivate us to seek partnership, how we blend and merge with another. Those with prominent Juno placements in their chart may be drawn to the path of commitment and focus on the seventh house lessons of cooperation, compromise, understanding, and harmony with others. Transits can indicate inceptions of relationship and periods of crisis and separation from relationship. So as the ideal mate, because Juno was worshipped as the ideal wife and bride, even though she was not happy in partnership, she can help us understand what we look for in an ideal mate, our capacity for meaningful relationship, and the degree of awareness and sensitivity we bring to these partnerships. As the give and take in relationship, she highlights the bargain in monogamy. So fidelity requires sacrifice, and partners should be valued for the choices they make for the sake of the unity and overall harmony. So whether or not you yourself are monogamous, there's probably many things you do in your partnership to maintain the union. And she invites us to think about what it is that we're willing to do, what it is that we want to do, what it is that we won't do, and how we want to be valued for the sacrifices that we make to support our relationships. Because everyone in partnership makes sacrifice, or they should, in order for the dynamic to be equal. And when we think about Sagittarius season, we think about a time in which we are encouraged or engaged or inspired to kind of pursue our dreams, follow our passions, and engage with that kind of fiery desire that can eclipse our consideration of the feelings of others. And so Juno, this exploration of Juno during the fire season, is designed to help us to think about, okay, what is it that currently blocks our fire? What relationships have we had in the past that have engaged in our fire? And in what ways are we afraid to play with fire? So Juno can indicate how we respond when relationships are not equal, challenges around issues of compatibility, receptivity to others, mutual sharing and trust, how we act out when our needs are not met. Do we become jealous, possessive, or engage in power struggles? And she can help us find the balance needed for contentment and partnership. When desire is integrated, then stress is no longer necessary. So if things are out of balance, that's usually an indication that some part of ourselves, our personality, our desire is not being fully honored. And so that can just be up to us to kind of take a look at what we need and more fully own it and honor it and embody it. And always when we're thinking about partnerships, we want to be thinking about not how can the other person make us happy, but how can we make ourselves happy through giving ourselves permission to really have what we want and need, and rather than sublimating our power and expecting somebody to meet our needs for us. So Juno in modern day, we see this archetype playing out anytime a woman has been wronged and takes matters into her own hands. And so in popular culture, she was personified as Angela Bassett's character in Waiting to Exhale, who sets her husband's car on fire when he's cheating on her. There's the modern song by Jasmine Sullivan, Bust your windows, bust the windows out your car. And then there's Lisa Left Eye Lopez from TLC, who in the 1990s set her boyfriend's billion-dollar mansion on fire out of anger. She set a fire in a bathtub that spread. So this is kind of the image of the scorned and vengeful woman that persists today. And these are all Juno embodiments. And it's just important to recognize that these archetypes, they don't go anywhere. They continue to speak, they continue to manifest, we continue to explore them, we continue to play with them. So part of the reason of studying astrology is to have a framework in order to do so constructively. So there's also The First Wives Club, a film about women who were faithful and dedicated and taken for granted. And the tagline is, don't get mad, get everything. So, beat men at their own game by suing them and taking their money because you've given them the blossom of your youth and they've taken you for granted. And now all you have left is to hit them where it hurts in their bank account and smoke cigars and make sassy faces. We have a really interesting manifestation of Juno with Angelina Jolie. When Brad Pitt split from Jennifer Aniston, there was a way in which Jennifer Aniston was the Juno character who kind of failed to give Brad children, and she was the failed Juno. And then Angelina Jolie took over as the queen, who was just really not sorry that she cheated and kind of won the throne. And so she was really cast in this role as the bad queen and the evil queen and the vixen, but she came to embody the Juno archetype as this woman who the media kind of loved to hate. And then we have Beyonce, who made a really amazing and beautiful and compelling album, Lemonade, that centered around her feelings about Jay-Z cheating on her. And one of the questions she asks in the song hold up is what's worse, looking jealous or crazy, jealous or crazy. So here we see, you know, her passion, her rage, her emotions literally spilling out of the courthouse, this institution of marriage and fidelity that she is given so much to. And similar to Juno, you know, Beyonce can have anyone she wants on earth, but she chooses to stay faithful to Jay-Z, even though he does not choose to stay faithful to her. So what we see here is that the archetype of Juno, it continues to be lived out by people constantly in society. And we want to learn how to integrate and elevate our experiences of these dynamics so that our relationships are not just one where one person is giving and one person is taking. And Sagittarius season can encourage us all to take, to become a little bit more selfish. And that's really good if you are usually the person who's giving, to start to be the one who receives. And it's really good if you're usually the person who is taking to be the one who starts to give. But the only way we can really make that shift is by bringing our constructive awareness into these unconscious patterns that are thousands and thousands of years old that have been passed down to us and for millennia, that are really no longer serving in the world that we currently live in, and that are indications that we need to evolve these stories, because the story of Juno and Hera, you know, was much more empowering before the rise of patriarchy, and it can be again. So we look at her and we see the psychological principles of abandonment, not being loved, met, or nurtured by the ones entrusted to that role. So her father swallows his children, and then her husband abandons her and betrays her. So we have this theme of abandonment, and abandonment is core to all human beings. So it's just thinking about how the way that you're raised set the stage for the dynamics that you embody in your current relationships. And Juno, we see here with sexuality, the issue of how are women or queer people, anyone who has a sexually marginalized identity, allowed to be both politically powerful and sexual? And the answer is that they're not, because that incites patriarchal fear. So marriage is this confining institution to control women's sexuality. And, you know, Juno eventually refuses to connect sexually with her partner or anyone else, and then denies herself the experience of sexual fulfillment. So she becomes an embittered queen on the throne, who's frigid and unhappy. And so when we think about a healthy expression of Juno, we think about someone who is able to inhabit a position of power in relationships, and who's also made to feel sexually desirable, and who is sexually fulfilled by her partnerships. So we have the issue of obligation, sex resulting in unwanted partnership to preserve reputation or due to familial pressure. So, you know, it was not until very recently that if people engaged in sex out of wedlock and that was discovered or that resulted in a child, that they would be pressured to marry. Or if someone was forced into a sexual experience, that could still happen. So this needing to preserve reputation above one's happiness. And obviously we've made great strides away from that, but there's still more work to be done with destigmatizing shame and guilt around sex, and movements like the slut walk and pro-sex movements really help to destigmatize and empower women to not be ashamed about their sexual desire. So Juno never gave Zeus children in many of the myths, and he doesn't have a legitimate heir from their union. And so this lack of children is seen as a failure. And, you know, being able to conceptualize women and people who choose not to have kids, who don't want to have kids, as whole and complete and fulfilled in their lives, without being parents. And Juno can speak to betrayal, trust in partnerships being broken due to faithlessness, so cheating, and, you know, it is well known that people with a lot of Sagittarius placements often struggle with monogamy. And if that's something that's true, you know, the best thing one can do if they have the desire to be non-monogamous or polyamorous is to just be really honest and open and discuss that, rather than stepping out, rather engaging in duplicity. And also on the other side, for someone who is in a relationship in which their partner is not being faithful, which causes a lot of unhappiness, taking responsibility for that and leaving the relationship rather than staying and being unhappy and making the other person miserable. So Juno can also indicate jealousy and the desire to control the behavior of one's partner, whether it's justified or not. If somebody's cheating on you and you know that, and you become very suspicious and jealous, that's a really natural reaction. But then rather than obsessing about what that person is doing, you know, what we want to do is focus on ourselves and put the lens of awareness on, well, why am I in a relationship with someone who's cheating on me? Or now that I know that, how can I make changes I need in order to be happier? Rather than how can I get them to stop doing what they're doing that's making me unhappy? Because trying to control other people doesn't actually work. And, you know, Juno learns the hard way, and so do many of us. So power, Juno desires equal partnership with Jupiter. And so do we partner with people who also hold as a value equal distribution of labor, emotional labor, physical labor, who want us to be and feel empowered in our lives and who support that? Juno engages in a lot of projection. She projects, you know, her power onto Zeus. He's the one that has the power. And so when we look at this dynamic of projection, we see that there's often an adopting of the identity of one's partner as their own. And so the success and failure of the partner becomes a focal point in the relationship. One is expected to sacrifice for and measure themselves against their partner's successes and failures and desires and dreams rather than their own. So when we see Juno out of balance in the chart, we can look at ways in which, for many reasons, it might be easier for someone to kind of focus their energy on supporting someone else rather than embodying their own dreams and power in their life. Possession, Jupiter desires to possess Juno, but refuses to participate lovingly in the partnership. So, you know, if somebody doesn't want to make you happy, but doesn't want you to leave, that can be a manifestation of the Jupiter and Juno dynamic. And, there has to just be a bottom line of if there's a dissonance between what someone says and what someone does, there has to just be a bottom line of those things must cohere or this doesn't work. So there's an abdication of power when Juno chose security over happiness. So always thinking about the way in which, what am I giving up and what am I getting from this partnership? And obviously every relationship requires sacrifice, but you want to feel like you're getting as much as you're giving, and we're never getting and giving the same things, but it has to feel right, and everyone knows when it feels right, and what feels right will be different for everybody. So this is an invitation to think about what feels right for you. And then manipulation. Juno sought to punish Jupiter through withholding of affection, guilting him, tricking him, deceiving him, flattering him, and being dishonest. So what are the ways in which, when we don't feel like we're allowed to be truly powerful or upfront or direct, we revert to these subtle manipulative power maneuvers, which ultimately don't actually lead us feeling good. So there's really a call to embody the amount of power that Jupiter has wherever Juno is indicated in the chart. So retaliation, Juno engages in a lot of horizontal hostility and attacking the women that Jupiter cheated on her with and the children that he sired, rather than, just directing her rage at him. Although she did do some of that. If she had done more of that, it probably just would have ended the relationship. So in the birth chart, we look at Juno, and we can look at one-on-one relationships, marriage, business, friendship, partnership, mates, equality and freedom, balance of power, compatibility, relationship counseling, marriage rituals and institutions, chastity, courtship, betrothal, engagement, marriage, separation, divorce, legal institutions, unwed unions, domestic partnership, anniversaries, children born in and out of wedlock. These are all the things she can indicate. Protocol and social ritual, host, hospitality, entertainment, etiquette, charm, beauty, adornment, dress, style, makeup, glamour, decor, creativity, art, performing, projection of image, mass, dance, drama, vocal, women's rights, equality, gender oppression, domestic violence, sexual abuse, environmentalism, climate change, and environmental justice. So when you look at Juno in the chart, you just want to, think about all these different categories and think about how they relate to the sign and the house placement, and how you are embodying this archetype and how this archetype is speaking through you. And healing Juno and healing ourselves, in thinking about how this archetype manifests in our own lives and in society, we can look at some questions as a jumping off point for exploring how Juno has shown up in your life and how she continues to show up, and what parts of the Juno archetype are you embodying really well, and where would you like more support? So these writing prompts are considered, are intended to be a gateway towards getting your awareness into your Juno placement and your relationship to partnership and the seventh house and this concept of the ideal mate. So what does equality look like to you in relationships? What does healthy compromise feel like in relationship? Have you ever had a partnership that felt like you gave more than the other person? If so, did you share those feelings? And was the other person able to hear your concerns? What are some examples of sacrifices you've made in relationships? Did you make them happily, or was it begrudgingly? And if you have different examples you kind of want to explore, I encourage you to write down multiple examples, because it's really important for us to like see, oh, actually I was really happy to, you know, move to a different city with you, but I wasn't happy to go on your family's holiday. You know, there's lots of ways that we can get information about ourselves, and ultimately when we have more self-knowledge, then we can act from a more skillful place, and we can ask for what we want with a more complete picture and confidence that we're being true to ourselves. Have you developed resentments in relationships towards your partners? What did you resent and why? If you're in a partnership now, you can think about what do you resent and why. And this is really, again, to draw us into awareness around how our needs are not getting met, maybe how we don't ask for what we need, or we maybe abandon ourselves by compromising in places where we should hold boundaries. And if we are encouraged to compromise on what we need when we're younger, we'll continue to do that as we age, and that will often play out in romantic partnerships, and there can become this pattern of self-abandoning that women and femme people are really socialized into. So have you ever withheld sex as punishment? Have you ever given things just to get something in return? What was the nature of that exchange? Have you ever withdrawn so that someone would chase you? Or have you been the one pursuing the chase? What is your ideal sexual dynamic in a relationship? So really, you know, thinking about both sides of the coin, we want to think about the ways in which Juno can help us to have greater happiness in our romantic partnership and to feel really fulfilled. So, you know, what would it be like to be fulfilled in monogamy or non-monogamy? You know, just really be honest with yourself about what an ideal sexual dynamic would be like, and you know, just let yourself write without judgment around that, or without being like, oh well, this isn't realistic, I'll never get this. And what would your ideal romantic partnership look and feel like? You know, it's really important that we get really specific about these things, that we write them all down and we share with the universe what it is that we want to create. And, you know, it's especially potent to do this kind of work if we're dating, to do it around the new moon that corresponds to our 5th house placement, or if we're in a marriage or seeking to be, you know, if we're in a long-term partnership around our 7th house moon, new moon. And if you're not sure what that is, please reach out, and I'm happy to help you to figure that out. How much alone time do you need in relationships? It's really important to know, you know, what it is that you actually need in order to be healthy and in order to renew and refresh yourself. So Juno's retreating is not inherently dysfunctional on its own. It's only problematic when it's a strategy of coping with an unhealthy, a larger unhealthy dynamic. But actually taking time alone to renew and regenerate is really an integral part in people maintaining their autonomy and sense of self in partnership. And lastly, what would it feel like to be fully supported in your own powerful expression? So, looking at Juno, thinking about what does it mean to be the queen of the gods? What does it mean to be the queen of heaven? And, what is it that you would like to be, to reign over? How would you like to feel powerful and supported in your life? How do you want to be queen of your domain? And what do you need in order to be supported in that? And what do you need from a partner in order to feel supported in that? So these are just some of the many questions that Juno is drawing us into. And of course, there's more. And if there's anything from the mythology that has kind of stirred things in you that you would like to explore, I encourage you to just kind of do some free writing. You can use these questions as a jumping off point and as a way to think about what does this archetype mean to us in modern days, and how would you like to reimagine what the queen of the heavens and the queen of the gods, what her experience of partnership is like. So for you and your own connection to divinity and the divine feminine, what kind of a template can the gods offer us for happier marriage and partnership and long-term committed partnership on earth, whether that is a multiplicity of forms of partnership? I think it is. And, maybe for you that involves partnership that has children, doesn't have children, involves committed wedlock, does not involve the legal institution of marriage, is about having a monogamous, faithful relationship, or is about having a multitude of sexual partners, but one primary partner, is about engaging in polyamory and having, someone you're committed to, but many different ongoing lovers. There's just so many ways in which humans are living our lives, and the stories and the myths and the legends and the archetypes need to be updated in order to express in healthy, nurturing, life-giving, and sustaining, healing ways. So that's what I have for you about Juno and Hera. I hope you have enjoyed this exciting exploration of an incredible and powerful goddess for Sagittarius season Fire Embodiment Workshop. And I look forward to hearing how this has resonated for you. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of Sagittarius season.